Hello, welcome or welcome back. I thought today we would have a little tarot chat about the newly revised Tarot of a Moon Garden. The deck is borderless and it comes with a guidebook that was long out of print. And so some of you might already know that Tarot of the Moon Garden is one of my ride or die kindred decks, like probably in my top 10. Not probably, like it is in my top 10. And so I have the version that is bordered, but on the newer cardstock that's really hard for me to shuffle. So then I trimmed that down, and then I bought this version off of eBay right here, which is like the older cardstock, which is lovely and shuffleable. And then I decided to leave the borders on this version just so that I could have this aesthetic to work with. And then we have the new version right here, which, again, as I said, it's borderless. Um, it has this gilt edging, and the images are a little more saturated. So when this new version came out, I was super excited at the idea of a larger borderless version, but even more than that, having the guidebook, which had been out of print for so long, and then on the off chance that you would find it on eBay or some type of marketplace, they would be selling for stupid amounts, in my opinion. So that was really the pull for me to have the guidebook. And perhaps somebody is wondering who already has the older version of the deck and who loves it just fine. They're wondering if this this kit is worth purchasing just for the guidebook alone. I personally am glad that I bought this. I found the guidebook to be helpful just in terms of providing a little more context to the images, clarifying what certain details were in the images, pointing out details that I hadn't even noticed in previous versions. So I just found the guidebook overall a fun read and worth it for me. I will point out that some of the language in this book feels outdated. To my knowledge, this is a straight reprint of the original companion book. There weren't any revisions or updates, at least none that I know, but please correct me if I'm wrong. So it's certainly, to me, it certainly reads that way because some of the information feels, a bit outdated. Some of the language gives the impression that there are rules to abide by, things that you should be doing. Like, for instance, the deck talks about rites of consecration and how, as a rule, rites of consecration are performed on the new moon, and then it goes on to list an exception. And I do get that sense here and there throughout this book that there are rules being presented. And, just for any newbies out there, newbies to tarot and to starting their own practice and figuring out as they go that, this kind of language I don't feel is helpful. And so there is that kind of directive impression that you get here and there throughout the book, just even in terms of like reading for others, having the querent cut the deck, and when they cut the cards, this should be done with the left hand. So just little details like that. It's a tone thing that didn't really jive with me, but I know to avoid or to ignore those details. Another aspect that I noticed in this book that I feel is common in older guidebooks is the assignment of a hair color and eye coloring to the court cards. So specifically in this book, the kings and queens are assigned hair and eye colors. So for instance, as an example, the Queen of Cups, light to dark brown or copper to deep auburn will usually color this queen's hair. For my part, I don't find those types of descriptions useful or helpful. Also in the guidebook, of course, not only do you get just a more comprehensive entry for each card in terms of, describing the image, the reading, and interpretation, you do get a ritual. So again, that might be useful to some people. I personally don't have the time or the materials actually, or the desire, honestly, to do these types of rituals, which is not to say they might not be useful to others. That's just something to note that it is provided in this guidebook. Again, for my part, just from the ones that I bothered to read, I wasn't going to take that time and to procure those materials. Now I'm going to just go through a few examples of how I think this guidebook really shined for me and why I don't regret getting this revised kit, if that's what you want to call it, even though I wanted the deck too. But the reason I bought this was in large part for the guidebook. So I'm going to just put the older version next to the borderless version so that you can see for yourself how they look. So for instance, in this full card, there were just some details that I did not know what they were. And the guidebook was helpful in pointing them out, or I didn't even notice that they existed, and the guidebook discussed them or mentioned them. And again, I've had this deck for a while, and now, to be fair, I'm sometimes not the most observant person in the world, and my eyes aren't the greatest, so there are those factors. But for instance, I never noticed that this right here was meant to be like a staff with a butterfly net ornamented with an 8-ball. So do you see that? It's an 8-ball right there, and it's like a butterfly net. Would not have known that. And I think in this version, because again, you have this border here, I think for me, the border kind of detracted that detail from my attention. So that was kind of fun and interesting to discover, as well as this right here. That is meant to be a mirror image scepter. I was like, what is that? Is that like a doll? What is that? I mean, it looks like the Fool. Is it supposed to be like a mini Fool, just like peeking out? But it is in fact a scepter. Here's the Death card. And the big thing for me with this Death card is right here. Right here. In this version, I can more clearly see that there is a face right there. Whereas in this version, I just never noticed it. Never noticed it, never would have thought that that was a face. But it does, to me, show more clearly here. And the companion book talks about how that this is a sacred blossom, and in the middle is Hecate or Hecate, depending on how you pronounce it. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever because that adds more meaning and more layer to this card and its interpretation. The Tower card. So just a couple things here. One, I did not realize until I read the companion book that there are in fact two figures here, as there is traditionally in the Smith-Waite version, and that figure is right here. I just thought that it was more of these like shooting flames. And again, it could be my old eyes, because you do in fact, now that you know it's a figure, like here's the hair, here's the face, I do think it is more visible on this version. And then another thing I noticed, and this wasn't from the guidebook actually, but just from this version, that's just, again, it feels brighter. We have this face here engulfed in flames. I never noticed that before. And it is there, but it's very, very muted. I never noticed it, but there they are. Here we have the world card. And I did notice this in the older version, you know, the 4 images here in the wings of the butterfly. They are faint, but I, in fact, did notice them. The man, the lion, ox, and eagle that you do also see in the Tradish RWS. Definitely more punched up and visible in this version. And the guidebook does mention those details. And then another detail that I found interesting from the book is that we have this figure in this pose, which again, similar to the world card in the RWS. And you know, the added context is that this is meant to resemble the Wunyo rune, the Futhark. I hope I'm saying that right. The Wunyo rune, which, you know, one of the main meanings of that rune is joy. And I don't know. I did a study of the runes like, oh gosh, I don't know how many years ago. So I have some rudimentary knowledge, but that is something that the guidebook talks about. And I think in the back, it even provides an image of all the Futhark runes. So I thought that was really interesting. So it's details like this that you don't get from the little white book, just from that tuck box older version, because all the little white book provides are the, you know, kind of go-to common, you know, recycled meanings that you get from so many other little white books. And like even with a card like this, I did not know what this was. And it's meant to be a knapsack. And I honestly, and some of you might be thinking, yeah, duh, Julie, but honestly, I did not know what that was. Yes, it references back to, once again, the RWS, but this does not look like a knapsack to me. And I think it's maybe because just the way it's drawn, like, I almost feel like if it's a sack, shouldn't it? I don't know. I don't know. It's just drawn weird. I'm like, what is that flapping in the wind? I had no idea what that was. So just some nice clarification of things that I always wondered what they were. And then even with something like this, the Page of Pentacles, the guidebook talks about this page catching a bubble of iridescent light. And it describes this bubble as being cast by a wood elf or a gnome or sorcery unknown. And so I find that fun. I find that it adds context, it adds like mood and atmosphere to the deck, to the imagery, and it just makes it a more engaging experience to use the deck. So that has been my experience working with this newly revised deck and this reprint of the companion book. So I am, yeah, just very pleased overall. Thank you for hanging out with me if you stayed with me for this long, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.